How you guys doing? This will be my fourth vlog because, as usual, I've missed more blog posts, and that's not totally my fault. My internet has been inconsistent to say the least, but I know I need to get some blogs up. I currently need to finish some, but I figure I would knock this vlog out. So, I'm not great at talking on video, so I have kind of crowdsourced some possible topics from people, and I'll just go with one I tried to cover in an earlier Jblog, but got extremely uh, distracted by my own whims. But that was the subject of video game violence and particularly first-person shooters. In that previous blog, which was more of a rant than a actually well well discussed subject, but I was trying to get at some points about some of the violent impulses that come, or excuse me, some of the violent impulses that we kind of exercise through video games and first-person shooters especially. But I didn't really have anything uh, definite to say about the subject. I was more just kind of asking some hypothetical questions, which I left very much wide open. So today there was actually a really great piece at Grantland, which is kind of a new upstart blog, but it was from a, I guess ex-soldier would be the correct term, who was playing a new game, actually I'm not sure if it's a first person or third person shooter, but it's called Spec Ops: The Line, and the hook essentially of the game is that it kind of transplants the Heart of Darkness inner struggle to a Middle Eastern or contemporary Middle Eastern setting. And so this writer talked about things in a lot, in a very intellectual and insightful way, a way which I'm not great at doing. But I'm going to kind of, for just a couple minutes, I'm going to try to defend things like Call of Duty, Halo, Gears of War, all these kind of pillars of the kind of new video game vanguard, if that makes any sense. But I think the thing to keep in mind, I hate the argument that it's a video game so you shouldn't care, because as many have pointed out, regardless of what you're doing, regardless of whether you're doing something in real life or in virtual reality, it doesn't obviously change the ethical implications of it. For example, you take something like GTA, you take something like Call of Duty, it doesn't change the fact, whether you're taking a baseball bat to a civilian or you're shooting a terrorist. There's really not that much of a difference. So I'm not stating that Call of Duty is on, or it has the same intention of something like a Grand Theft Auto, which I completely understand why people don't like it. But I think the appeal of Call of Duty lies very much in the same appeal as something like Michael Bay or a lot of really bad blockbuster action films. Like for instance, last night I watched a film called True Lies, which is one of James Cameron's earlier films, but it's an action film with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jamie Lee Curtis. But there's a chase in there with a motorcycle and Arnold Schwarzenegger on a horseback. So I think it's those type of moments, those type of very scripted, exciting kind of crazy edge of your seat moments that really populate the best first person shooters. I mean, there are some that do strive for more um, intellectualism. I mean, not to spoil Call of Duty, but I can say that in both the Modern Warfare series and the Black Ops series, there are a couple insightful moments. I know that Modern Warfare 2 got a lot of slack for one level in an airport. I actually found, although I was very, very uncomfortable playing that level, I found it very ballsy of the developer to do that level. Same goes for a level in Modern Warfare 1 where a character dies from radiation after you try to stop a nuclear bomb. So the I think these developers do definitely want to inject pathos into the first-person shooter genre, and I mean I think Call of Duty's kind of become the whipping post for first-person shooters as just being very, very mindless. Um, and to an extent, they definitely are. As I was trying to say and keep getting sidetracked from, the joys of Call of Duty are not really far divorced from something like Rambo or Die Hard or something along those lines. I think at sometimes it tries to be much more full of itself. Even if it does have levels where you're fighting through a dilapidated, burned down version of the White House. So I mean, I think there's certainly a line of credibility and plausibility that's crossed very, very often. But the point about these games is that I think the biggest problem about whether they're glorifying war or things like that, I think it's the scenarios that try to really try to create a simulator for war, that it becomes a really fine line. And I'm just going to go back to this Grantland piece right here at the end. He was talking about the writer was at once a developer working on a now canceled game, and he was talking about how the game he was creating was taking place during a particular war which he didn't specify. I assume he meant Vietnam, but he was saying that there was no feedback when you killed a person in the game. So therefore, the only feedback a person had on whether they had shot someone was finding the dead bodies, which is a much more disturbing indicator than what would be expected in a first-person shooter. So I think there's a lot of rightful contention about whether games that propose to be some kind of realism, whether they should also deal with the psychological effects, or whether they should simply be an experience not unlike that of an action movie. So I think that's the problem with something like Call of Duty, which toes the line. Personally, I don't really see the argument for something like Halo or Gears of War, just because it's kind of in that fantasy setting. Not that that excuses the amount of violence, but I think Call of Duty in particular, because it can't decide between fantasy and reality, and kind of tiptoes in between the two, occasionally bringing real-life events, real-life places, things like that. I think that's what really gives it a lot of its slack. And also, I mean, as far as the actual personal experience, I think it really lowers the emotional involvement by having a moment where you're trying to get the player to think, okay, this is horrible, or this is really pushing at the heartstrings, but then you have the next moment where you're in a crazy chase where you're jumping from motorcycles to planes and, all kinds of really expansive, grandiose set pieces. So I've talked for far too long now. But this is just kind of what I was trying to get across in that blog post, and I'll hopefully have a few more up today. So, signing off. Bye-bye.